Welcome to the World Extreme Medicine podcast. My name's Will Duffin, GP and Education Lead. If you're a paramedic, doctor, nurse, physio, or indeed anyone working in healthcare who has a curious and adventurous mind, then this is the podcast for you. Now, I'm sure, like me, after all the doom and gloom in the media, perhaps you're in need of something a bit uplifting and inspirational. Well, our guest today is exactly that. Sarah Thomas is now a world famous marathon swimmer and is joining me from her home in Colorado. After crossing many great bodies of water, including Loch Ness, Lake Tahoe, Lake Powell in Utah, she set her sights on the English Channel, but she wasn't interested in just crossing it once. She set out to complete 4 consecutive crossings. That's a world first. And at age 37, on September the 17th, 2019, she swam nearly 130 miles over 54 hours and 10 minutes to complete this feat, a feat that no other swimmer has previously managed. And what makes this even more remarkable is that she completed this swim 1 year after finishing a course of chemoradiotherapy and mastectomy for breast cancer. And Sarah lives with her husband in Denver, Colorado. And when she's not swimming, she's actually a medical recruiter. Sarah, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. How are things over there in Denver?
Oh, they're pretty good. The sun is out today, but I think we might get some snow this weekend. So
how bizarre.
Advantage of sunshine today for sure.
Yeah. And how's lockdown life treating you so far?
You know, it's all right. It's a little maddening, but cozy here with my husband and our dogs, and we're both still able to work. So that is a positive.
Great. Keeping yourselves busy. And your husband's not a swimmer, I understand.
No, he's not a swimmer at all. We threw him in Lake Tahoe once, and my friend and I had to debate if we were going to let him drown or not because we were a little worried.
But just for fun, you left him for as long as possible.
Yes, we definitely left him as long as possible.
Brilliant. Well, I'd love to explore some of your incredible swimming feats over the course of this podcast. But why don't we start at the very beginning? What was it that drew you to open water swimming in the first place?
Yeah, you know, it was one of those things, you know, I'd been a competitive pool swimmer my whole life. And as an adult, I joined a swim team kind of after university. And some of my friends on the swim team suggested that I give it a try. And I had never even considered open water swimming. I grew up in Texas, and the lakes there aren't very inviting. Who knows what creatures you might encounter. And so it had never even crossed my mind to try it. And so they pushed me, and, you know, it took about 1.5 years. And then I finally gave in and signed up for a 10K race in one of our lakes here. And I just completely fell in love with it.
Wow. And what was it about, because you started out in the pool, in a very competitive environment, what was it about transitioning from that to big open bodies of water that really captured your imagination, do you think?
Yeah, I think there's 2 pieces of it. The first piece is, you know, I always enjoyed training and, you know, long, hard workouts. And I never really loved like competition in the pool. So some of open water it's just so much more about pushing your own limits and, you know, doing your personal best rather than beating everybody else. You know, it's not, you know, it's competitive, but it's not, you know, super intense competition like you get in pool racing. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, the other piece of it is I just really love being outside, you know, with the sky above you, and, you know, you can just go with no walls to worry about, you know, doing a flip turn and no lane lines to hold you back. You can just really feel so much more free and at the elements. It's just a much more natural experience than being in a chlorinated torture box.
Yeah. And one of the great places that you've swam is Lake Powell in Utah. And that sounds like a really stunning place. Can you describe what that swim was like?
Yeah, it was just beautiful. We went in early fall, and the water was still warm. The air temperatures were just a little bit crisp, and the lake is really long lake, but it's fairly narrow. And so you're just kind of swimming through these canyons with these big, tall, red rock walls all around you, and just, blue sky on top of you. And it was just one of the most surreal, serene places that I've ever been. Just beautiful, clear water. I could see fish, and just really remote. At night we could see shooting stars. It was just probably one of the most stunning places I've ever been in the water.
Wow, I can really picture that. And for all of us self-isolating, lockdown, armchair adventurers listening to this, Sarah, we can really conjure that up in our minds. So you'd swam. You've had quite a long swimming career, and you've gone from a competitive environment. You swam all through school. Then you were developing your open water swimming, and then you decided to take on the world's most polluted and busy shipping lane, that the little stretch of water between the UK and France. Why the English Channel?
Yeah, I had swum the English Channel one time in 2012, and I didn't get it. There's all these other places you can swim, and um, it was just kind of a box to check. Everyone swims the English Channel, and I set off to do it, just kind of checking a box. And when I was in the water in 2012, it just became this magical experience. And when I came out of the water in France, I don't know, it's just one of those moments you're like, wow, and I don't think you can really understand the magnitude of what you have done until you actually accomplish that. If I'm talking to people about my marathon swimming, and I've done a 100-mile swim, I've done an 80-mile swim, I've done this 50-mile swim, they don't care. All they want to know is, well, have you done the English Channel? There's just that history, and just it's a special place, and it holds a special place in marathon swimming. And so, any swimmer who does a couple of marathon swims, they want to swim the English Channel. And then it's a magical place. So when you start thinking about ways that you can go longer or further, the English Channel obviously comes to mind, kind of at the top of the list as a cool place to do a really long swim.
And since the very first crossing of the English Channel by a swimmer, which I think was in the late 1800s, please correct me if I'm wrong, there's been a long history. Would you say that the channel in marathon swimming is like Everest for mountaineering?
Yeah, I think people definitely make that comparison. It's fun to tell people that more people have climbed Everest than have swum the English Channel. It's definitely a different type of a challenge for sure. But yeah, they're definitely comparable.
Yeah, absolutely. And swimming a channel just once, let alone 4 times in one go, is no small feat, and that obviously takes some planning and preparation. Can you give us a sense of just the scale of planning that this required, and what kind of team you needed to assemble to make this feat possible?
Sure. So the English Channel, there is a wait list. So when you can't just decide, in January that you want to swim the English Channel in August. So I had talked to a boat captain in early of 2017. When you're going to go 4 times in a row, you need a really big window of time because the weather is fairly unpredictable. So when I approached my boat captain, and I used the same boat captain that I had used for my first swim for the second one, he impressed me in my first swim, and there was no one else I wanted to try this with other than him. And so I emailed him and I said, this is what I want to do. First of all, do you want to help me? Because it's a big commitment on their end. And then the second question is, when can we go? And he didn't have a big enough window when I was talking to him. And like January or February of 2017 until September of 2019. That was the first possible opportunity that he had where he could dedicate a couple of weeks to my swim. And so that's the first piece is, you book your swim, and English Channel is nice because the boat captains have years and years of knowledge, and they've taken hundreds of swimmers across. So, they understand what the tides and the currents are going to do. So in some aspects, planning the swim was easier than some of the other long swims I've done that have been more self-supported, where I had to, rely on friends to navigate and, do the GPS plots and, all of those aspects. So English Channel is nice. You don't have to worry about that. But then the other piece is finding my own team who can be on the boat to handle my feeding and my mental needs, and just to make sure that I'm taken care of. So there's two pieces in the planning, the boat people and then my people. And it takes a lot to find people who can, travel for 2 weeks away from their jobs and their families, and people who don't get seasick and, who actually want to sit on a boat and watch me do something for 54 hours, because it's not exactly a spectator sport. There's a lot of long, hard slog, making really slow progress. So, it's definitely an adventure.
Absolutely. And what was the makeup of your team? Who did you have on your boat by your side while you were swimming along?
Yeah, so English Channel boats are small. Most of them are converted fishing boats. The boat we used was a little bit larger, but they had pretty strict limitations on how many people I could bring. So first of all, they had to have 3 boat captains just to meet all the like the English regulations for shipping and boats. I don't know the technical terms. So there's the main captain, Eddie, and then his 2 sons as kind of first mates, second captains, to take over when Eddie needed a break. And then the Channel Swimming and Piloting Federation sends observers to make sure that I'm following all the rules. So there was 2 observers, and then I had 5 of my own people. My husband was one of them. My mom was one of them. And then I had 3 close friends who are swimmers, who had all swum the channel and done some pretty incredible swims themselves. So those 5 people were really, truly responsible for, keeping me on track and healthy and all of that stuff.
I see. Did you have medical support of any kind?
We didn't. On a lot of my other longer swims that I have done, my cousin is actually a paramedic, so he has come on those longer swims for medical support. One of the advantages of the English Channel is that it is one of the busiest shipping lanes, and they can get medical support to you rather quickly if you need it. So the Coast Guard is available. They can get you, back into England or over to Calais if you need it. So that's definitely a consideration when you plan a long swim, because it's important to make sure that if you crash, or go hypothermic or something, that you have support.
Absolutely.
So it's definitely a top question to deal with when you're planning a long swim.
So you mentioned, presumably when you say the word crash, you mean if you hit the wall or you run out of steam, and high, that distance, very, very possible. And hypothermia is another big thing. Were there any other kind of potential medical issues that you were preparing yourself for?
Hypothermia is generally the top medical condition to be aware of. Anytime you're in any body of water, no matter what the temperature, you're at a risk for hypothermia after a long amount of time. And then, definitely worried about, like heart conditions and, things like that. Obviously I've, had a lot of medical tests done, and we know that my heart is strong, but, a lot of people, have heart attacks. Pulmonary edema is a big thing in the channel, where you just get too much water in your lungs. And I've heard terrifying stories of people, taking on too much water, and it puts you into a strange mental state. And if you don't get medical attention pretty quickly, it can be catastrophic to you. So, you're always thinking about those 3 things, especially in the English Channel.
Wow. And the pulmonary edema, is that just from swallowing salt water and that getting into your lungs? Is that what causes that?
I think, it's really strange. You don't hear about pulmonary edema too much in other swims. You hear about it fairly commonly in the English Channel. And I don't know if that's just because there's more people
Hmm.
out there, and so it kind of increases the chances of it happening. But you're right at the water surface, and if it's windy and choppy and you're fatigued, it's easy to kind of inhale water and get water into your lungs. And it's scary, and all the English Channel boat captains and their crew and observers know the signs of that. So
Hmm.
if they think that's coming on, they'll pull you out of the water in a heartbeat.
Yeah, yeah. And I love the images of you coming out of the water when you completed it. People would be expecting, I grew up on the south coast of England. I know how cold that water is, even in the summer. People would be expecting you to wear a wetsuit. But no, you were just in a swimming costume and some goose fat.
Yes, it's English Channel swimming tradition that you don't wear a wetsuit. The first person to swim the English Channel back in the late 1800s was Captain Matthew Webb, and he did it just in a swimsuit, and I don't even think he had goggles back then. And that is just the tradition of English Channel swimming rules. If you want an official swim, you don't wear a wetsuit.
So those are the rules.
Yeah, that's the rules.
Wow.
You can wear, just a regular old swimsuit, no, nothing special. I just wear the swimsuit that I train in all summer, so it's nice and broken in, and one swim cap, and your goggles and earplugs if that's what you want, and that's all.
Because I mean, just exposing your bare skin over 54 hours to those waters. Did you feel the cold at any point during your swim, or was the adrenaline just powering you through?
Yeah, I've been open water swimming for 10 years. 10 years ago, that would have been really cold and a really hard challenge, but I've been exposed to it and training in it. And honestly, I wasn't cold. That was like the least of my worries during the swim. I came out and I wasn't frozen. It was just one of those things. You prepare for it, you train for it, and you can get used to an awful lot of things if you work hard at it.
Yeah. And what was the lowest point during that swim? Each of those 4 consecutive crossings. At which point were you thinking, "Man, this sucks"?
Yeah. Um, so we started at midnight, which is a hard time to start a swim. Your start time is guided based off of currents and tides, right? So that particular day in our weather window, we could either start at noon or at midnight. And my boat captain really wanted to be in France during the daylight. It's a little bit harder to get into shore. The currents are strange over there. So he really wanted to be there in the daylight. So that meant starting at midnight. I didn't sleep hardly at all that day. Leading up to it, I tried. But when we hit the 24-hour mark, so we had done one lap and we were back in England, basically right where I started. It's midnight the next day, and I was sick. Something in my nutrition wasn't going quite right, and I had some nausea and throwing up on that second lap. I'm on my way back to England, and we kind of hit the English coast, and my friend gave me something solid to eat, and I immediately threw it up. And I was telling her, like, I'm sick. I don't think that I can do this. I think the exact words I said were, I don't have what it takes. And, kind of not really crying, but, feeling pretty sorry for myself. And, she just looked at me and said, well, we've just got to swim back. So we'll see what it does. We'll see what happens when the sun comes up. And, the next 6 hours between midnight and when daylight came was just miserable. I was throwing up. I don't even know how many times. I did feel a bit cold then just because I was, depleted in my nutrition, and it was miserable. It was terrible. And I didn't think that I would make it at all.
Wow. I mean, and what do you think about all that time with your head down in the water? You must have a lot of time to think. What kind of stuff's going through your brain?
People always want to know, and it's so boring. you know, my goal is to get just kind of to a peaceful blank state where time just kind of drifts by really quickly. And when that's not happening, it's tough. But then you start to think about more technical things, like, does my shoulder hurt? Am I putting my arm into the water in the right position? Am I finishing my stroke? Am I kicking? So you start just thinking, really small about what your body is doing, and what you can do to make it more efficient. You really don't think about how much further you have to go, or how much longer you need to be in the water, or how far you've already swum. You're really just contained into the movement and motion of your body, and the rhythm and the routine of going through a swim.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. Do you feel like you are able to get into a kind of flow state that swimming for you can be quite meditative?
Mm-hmm. It really is. It's really peaceful. I don't necessarily do yoga, but people who talk about having a good yoga practice, you really just get in tune with your body, and you're really present in the moment. And I think that happens to me when I'm swimming. It's just it's very calming and peaceful, truly. And it's a great feeling when you're in that moment. Sometimes it's really hard to get there. And that is what makes the swim hard, is when you can't find that peace internally.
Okay. What I'd like to do now, Sarah, is just rewind the clock back to 2017 when you were diagnosed with breast cancer. What was that like?
It's definitely not something I would wish upon anybody else in this world. In August of 2017, I had done a 104-mile swim in Lake Champlain. And, it took me 67 hours of continual swimming. It's a record for the longest current neutral swim ever. And, I did that in August. And then just a couple of months later, I got my breast cancer diagnosis. And it's really hard to go from feeling like you're at the top of your game, you can accomplish anything that you put your mind to being a cancer patient where you have no control over your body, very little control over your treatment plan. It just turns everything upside down.
Wow. It must have felt like a huge, huge setback. And it must have been quite terrifying.
Yeah, I think terrifying is the right word. There was a lot of tears. When you first get the diagnosis, they don't, there's a lot of testing that goes into it to find out exactly what kind of breast cancer you have. And, I was told I had a particularly aggressive form. And, hearing that, you just don't know, is the treatment going to be effective? Is chemo going to work? Sometimes it doesn't. And it's just, there's just so much to take in, so much information, so much to learn, and, processing all of that. And then, you start to think, is this going to take away swimming? Because I don't know if I really want my world without being able to swim. Doctors early on, they don't know what to tell you. Like they want to tell you that everything's going to be fine, but until you start progressing through treatment and seeing how your body's going to react, they can't give you any definitive answers as to whether or not you're going to be fine. And it's hard. It was, the first couple of months of that cancer diagnosis were awful. I'm not really a crier. My husband's not a crier. And there was a lot of tears, just trying to wrap your brain around what you're going through and figuring out how to handle it emotionally.
And what role did swimming play during your cancer treatment? Was that something that you could, that was helpful to you in terms of boosting your own resilience and getting through the experience?
Yeah, it was, I don't know that if I didn't have swimming, I'm not sure how I would have managed to get through, especially chemo. I swam, 3 to 4 times a week during chemo. It was something that my doctors and my nurses really encouraged me to do as much as possible. I think historically people picture, people going through chemo as just sick and weak and, lay in bed and, suffer. And that was not my experience. There's really good drugs out there help fight off some of the nausea. And so, chemo was terrible and horrible, but it was definitely manageable. Obviously I wasn't training at top level during chemo, but just getting in the water and being able to exercise and, to do things that felt like me, it was really important. And then also, that English Channel swim was already booked, that was already on the horizon. And so it was a goal, and, talking to my doctors about this long-term goal, they think you're nuts, but, having that goal and something to look forward to was really important to getting through all of my chemo treatment. It kept me focused. It kept me motivated. There's not too much time to wallow in self-pity when you've got something bigger that you're trying to work towards.
Wow. Yeah. That sounds like it was So the Channel swim, you'd already booked that before the breast cancer diagnosis. Wow. So a big personal goal was like, I'm going to get this done, whatever happens. I'm not going to let cancer kind of defeat me. Yeah. Wow.
And some people, friends and, some people in my medical team, they suggested, well, maybe 2019 might be a little too soon. You're kind of pushing it a little bit. Think about pushing it back a year, maybe two. And no, I didn't, that wasn't really an option for me.
It's not how you do things.
No, it's not, and I'd already had it booked and it was planned, and we went for it.
I'm going to do this. Amazing.
Yeah, and so the way it works, I'd already booked the English Channel swim. Year before you swim, you have to pay your deposit. So, my boat captain, Eddie, and I are friends on Facebook. So obviously he knew what I had been going through, and he knew I had just finished treatment, and he sent me this really nice email, and he's like, I hate to ask you this, young lady, but are you still planning to swim next year? And I think I took maybe a day to respond to him and make sure that I was all in. But yeah, I emailed him back and I was like, yep, we're going to do this, Eddie. I'm coming.
Wow. Okay, Sarah, let's fast forward now can you take us to the moment where you were on the beach having completed 4 consecutive crossings of the English Channel and you've just done it? How did that feel?
It felt like relief. The last hour of that swim was really intense. The currents were pushing us in very strange directions. They were really strong. I could feel them pushing against me. So, I spent the last hour of that swim really giving it 110%, everything that I had left in me to get through the currents. So, I was a little bit disoriented. I didn't, we had been pushed up and down the coast all night. And so I had kind of lost track of exactly where we were. And, so I'm just swimming. My crew is telling me to swim. They're yelling and cheering and motivating me to, get me in. I've got a friend in the water next to me, and, he's telling me, go as fast as you can, go, go, go. And I didn't know that if we were going to actually make it in until I saw the land underneath me. And so, I crawl out of the water. The pebbles on the Dover shore are not conducive to standing, even on a good day. So, crawling out and sitting there where am I? Am I actually here? Did I do this? And there's crowds, there's TV cameras. And it was just one of those moments wow, we did it. And I'm glad because someone put a towel around me, and I couldn't imagine anything feeling more delightful than just a dry towel.
Yes, I bet. And I mean, that must have felt incredible, having overcome the kind of the most terrible setbacks, being diagnosed with cancer and actually achieving a world first like that. That must have just been euphoric.
Yeah, in some ways, I think it's still sinking in. When you focus on something and work towards something for so long, and then relatively speaking, it goes by really fast. When it's done, you're like, wow, did that really happen? Was that me? Did I do that? It's an interesting feeling.
Yeah, I bet. And it's amazing. I've looked at your route across the channel. You think between Dover and Calais it would be quite a straight line, but actually due to the tides and the current, it's just this massive saggy S shape. It's the least most direct route you could ever imagine. That, I mean, it must have been so demoralizing being dragged around by the ocean.
Yeah, well, the plus side is you don't know any of that when you're in the water, right? The people on the boat know what's happening, but when you're in the water, you're just swimming. Your whole world revolves around one stroke at a time and making sure you're staying next to the boat next to you. So, I expected the S curve in a lot of ways. There are spring tides and neap tides. Neap tides are typically when you swim the English Channel because the currents are not as strong. So if we had gone on a neap tide, it would have been a slightly more direct route, but there still would have been the push and pull of the current. But just because of the weather, we were forced to go on a really strong spring tide, and spring tides are huge. And so that is what you saw was a really big, strong spring tide pushing me back and forth across the channel. It really tested Eddie's knowledge of currents, so that really a testament to his piloting ability that he landed right on the cap in France both times. That we actually did finish point-to-point swims and all 4 laps. I mean, that was not my swimming ability. That was his piloting ability.
Wow.
Because his ability and knowledge is phenomenal. And I can't speak enough about Eddie and his skills as a boat captain to get me across the channel the way that we did.
Teamwork makes the dream work.
Yeah, definitely. We needed every single person on that boat to make this swim happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's next though? So you've done 4 crossings of the channel. Have you cooked up any other madcap swimming projects?
This year, 2020, was always going to be kind of a break. We had a pretty intense 4 years. I did 80-mile swim in Lake Powell in 16 and 100-mile swim in Champlain in 17. And then 18, obviously, I had cancer. And then in 2019, it was really focused on this English Channel swim. And so there was just this, it's just been 4 years of a lot of pressure. So 2020, more for my husband, let's go camping, let's go flying, let's do some less demanding hobbies for a change. And honestly, the timing is probably good with this pandemic. A lot of swims are being canceled, so it's nice I don't have anything really to stress about and worry about right now. But I can tell you 2021, I'll come up with an idea. I don't have anything.
Sure you will.
But there'll be something.
Yeah. Well, many of the other extreme athletes that I've spoken to are they just go bang, 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 one thing to the next. Right. And I don't think they always take time to savor their achievements. And you've got a great window now to be able to do that.
Yeah.
But sure. You are working on a documentary.
Yep, we do have a documentary. Hopefully it'll come out this fall. Things are a little up in the air with slowing a lot of things down.
Yeah.
But we'll see. Hopefully we're working on it. Should be good. It's mostly focused on just the English Channel swim. That's kind of the, it's not, my whole life story or anything like that, but you have some really great footage of swimming and some good storytelling from people who are on my team.
Great. Well, we're all looking forward to that being finished and watching that. And is there any message you'd like to give out to the health workers that are currently manning the front lines of this pandemic?
Just thank you. We appreciate you, and keep up the hard work and the good work, and stay safe, please. We need you.
That's great. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for your time chatting to me. It's just phenomenal, your story, and very inspirational. If you can get through breast cancer and do 4 crossings of the channel, then it makes me feel like I can get through a pandemic. So that's been really great.
Yes, I hope so. Yes. I keep telling myself that too. Like, okay, I did this already once. I can do it again. It's all right. But it's tough.
Got this.
Doesn't make it any easier, that's for sure.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for your time today, Sarah.
Great. Well, thank you.